The 13th century, an age of absolute terror for Europe. From the distant steppes of the East, an unprecedented military force swept across the continent like a storm of apocalypse. This was the Mongol Empire, an undefeated army that had conquered the largest contiguous land empire humanity had ever witnessed. In 1241, that nightmare arrived in Hungary. At the Battle of Mohi, the Mongols inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Hungarian army, one of the most significant losses in European history. A quarter of the population perished. Most towns and villages were razed to the ground. The Kingdom of Hungary was nearly erased from the map. But this wasn't the end of the story. 44 years later, in the winter of 1285, the Mongols returned, once again with a massive army, once again with ambitions of conquest. But this time, the outcome was completely different. This time, it was Hungary that crushed the Mongol forces. How could a kingdom once devastated turn the tables against a seemingly invincible enemy? This is a story of lessons learned in blood, iron will, and one of the greatest comebacks in military history. April 11th, 1241, on the banks of the Sajo River near the town of Mohi. The Hungarian army of roughly 100,000 men, one of the most powerful forces in Europe at the time, faced the Mongol army commanded by two legendary generals, Batu Khan and Subutai. King Bela IV of Hungary was confident of victory. He had the numerical advantage, outnumbering the Mongols by at least 20,000 men. But that confidence quickly turned into a nightmare. The Mongols attacked with a perfectly coordinated pincer movement. Batu Khan concentrated his forces in a frontal assault on the bridge, while Subutai quietly led his troops across the river to the north, encircling the Hungarians from behind. The Hungarian forces were trapped in their own camp, surrounded by their wagons. A cattle pen, as Batu Khan described it. They couldn't maneuver, couldn't counterattack. Then Mongol arrows rained down like a storm. Flaming projectiles from catapults crashed into the crowded camp. Mongol heavy cavalry charged in for the slaughter. The Hungarians fled in panic, but the Mongols blocked every direction. It was a massacre. King Bela barely escaped, fleeing westward and eventually taking refuge in Croatia. But the country he left behind was a hell on earth. For the next year, Mongol forces swept through Hungary like wolves. They pillaged, massacred, and burned. When they withdrew in 1242, Hungary had lost a quarter of its population, approximately 500,000 people. Most towns and villages had been leveled. A once prosperous kingdom was now reduced to ashes. But why did Hungary suffer such a devastating defeat? First, the kingdom had virtually no defensive fortifications. Most towns and cities had no walls. Only a handful of stone castles existed, and they were too few and far between to protect the population. When the Mongols came, people had nowhere to hide. Second, the Hungarian army consisted primarily of light cavalry, fast and mobile, but unable to withstand Mongol archery tactics. Only a small number of Knights Templar and Teutonic Knights in heavy armor had managed to inflict significant damage on the Mongols in close combat. But they were too few. When King Bela IV returned to his devastated kingdom, he faced a brutal truth. If the Mongols returned, Hungary would be completely annihilated. And everyone knew the Mongols would return. It was only a matter of time. But Bela IV wasn't one to surrender to fate. From the ashes of defeat, he began building a new Hungary, a Hungary that could defeat the Mongols. And he had 44 years to prepare. The first and most crucial reform, fortifications. If there was one clear lesson from 1241, it was this. Only stone castles could stop the Mongols. Bela IV ordered the construction of a massive defensive network on an unprecedented scale. He offered huge subsidies and incentives to any city willing to build solid stone walls. The result? During Bela IV's reign, Hungary constructed over 100 new stone fortresses. All major cities were now surrounded by thick stone walls. A network of castles was built throughout the kingdom, transforming Hungary into a giant hedgehog. Anyone wanting to invade would face hundreds of fortified strongpoints. But castles alone weren't enough. Bela IV understood he needed a new army. In 1241, Hungary's light cavalry had been helpless against Mongol tactics. But the heavy knights, the Knights Templar and Teutonic Knights, had proven they could defeat Mongols in close combat. The problem was that there were too few of them. So the solution was clear. Hungary needed a massive heavy cavalry force. Bela IV began reorganizing Hungary's entire mounted force along Western European lines. In 1247, he struck a bold deal with the Knights Hospitaller. Bela granted them his entire southeastern frontier, a vast territory, in exchange for their help recruiting more heavy knights and building new stone castles. In 1248, he took another breakthrough step. Bela expanded the privilege of knighthood, previously reserved for high nobility, to the middle class. Anyone who could equip themselves with armor and a war horse could become a knight and serve in a baron's cavalry. He even encouraged immigrants from other kingdoms to settle in Hungary. If they could outfit themselves for combat, they would be granted nobility and land ownership. Thousands of warriors from across Europe poured into Hungary, attracted by this opportunity. But there was another type of soldier that had proven effective against the Mongols in 1241, crossbowmen. Though scarce, the crossbowmen present at Mohi had inflicted considerable damage on the Mongols. Crossbow bolts could pierce leather armor and even some types of Mongol metal armor. Bela IV recognized this potential. He struck a deal with Venice, home to the finest crossbowmen in Europe. Under this agreement, at least 1,000 Venetian crossbowmen entered Hungarian service. This was an elite force, professionally trained, capable of delivering devastating long-range firepower. By 1270, Hungary was transformed, its defenses fortified, its armies modernized, and its resolve strengthened, ready for any challenge. Bela IV died without seeing his work tested. But 15 years later, in the winter of 1285, that test arrived. Winter 1285. Nogai Khan, the de facto ruler of the Golden Horde, the northwestern sector of the Mongol Empire, commanded a massive army estimated between 30,000 and 50,000 men marching westward. Target, Hungary. This time, Nogai wanted to conquer this kingdom once and for all. Nogai believed the mission would be easy. He'd heard reports of internal strife in Hungary. In fact, a large number of Cumans, a nomadic people, had been expelled from Hungary and sought service with the Mongols. They told Nogai the kingdom was weak and vulnerable to attack. Like 1241, the Mongols attacked on two fronts. Nogai led forces through Prešov into Transylvania in the south. Talabuga, commanding the largest contingent, marched through the Vereki Pass in modern-day Ukraine into Transcarpathia in the north. The plan was perfect. Attack in winter when no one expected it. Use speed and surprise, the Mongol trademark, to crush Hungary before it could mobilize its army. But from the very first days, nothing went according to plan. Talabuga and his main force entered northern Hungary, expecting a quick and easy campaign. Instead, they encountered a nightmare. The first problem, nothing to plunder. Everywhere Talabuga looked, there were stone castles. And the villagers did what their ancestors couldn't do in 1241. They fled into these castles, taking all their livestock and food supplies with them. When the Mongol army arrived, they found only empty villages. No food, no loot, nothing. The Mongol army, accustomed to living off the lands they invaded, now had to march through a barren landscape. They passed castle after castle, unable to capture any of them, unable to obtain any food. Then starvation began. Thousands of Mongol soldiers died from lack of provisions in the early weeks of the campaign. This wasn't warfare. This was a survival battle against Hungary's successful fortification strategy. Talabuga reached the city of Pest, which the Mongols had burned in 1241. He hoped to at least capture this city, but Pest had been completely evacuated. The population had fled to local fortresses. Once again, Talabuga found nothing, but worse was waiting. From the fortified stronghold of Buda, a contingent of Hungarian heavy cavalry suddenly charged out, attacking the marching Mongol column. They struck fast, inflicted casualties, then retreated into the fortress before Talabuga could counterattack. Queen Elizabeth of Sicily even observed the battle from Buda's walls. This was a tactic the Mongols had never encountered in Hungary. Heavy cavalry attacking from secure bases. Talabuga couldn't retaliate because he couldn't besiege the fortresses. He didn't have the time or supplies to do so. This repeated throughout northern Hungary. Hungarian cavalry units constantly harassed, attacked, and then withdrew to safety. The Mongols could raid some rural areas and kill civilians in places without nearby fortresses, but they couldn't capture any strategic objectives. Then came the real disaster. Near the fortress of Turushko, a major Hungarian force engaged. This wasn't just harassment. This was a full-scale battle, and the result shocked the Mongols. Hungarian heavy knights, professionally trained, equipped with Europe's finest weapons, charged into the Mongol forces with devastating impact. Unlike the light cavalry of 1241, these knights didn't fear Mongol arrows. Their armor blocked most projectiles, and when they closed in, their swords and lances shattered Mongol formations. Talabuga was decisively defeated. Hungarian forces captured approximately 1,000 prisoners in this engagement. This was a major defeat, the kind the Mongols rarely experienced. Talabuga's army, already weakened by starvation and constant attacks, was now in dire straits. But the worst news was yet to come. In the hills of western Transylvania, Talabuga and his exhausted army suddenly faced what he feared most: the main Hungarian army led by King Ladislaus IV. This wasn't the army the Mongols had faced in 1241. Before Talabuga stood thousands of heavy knights, gleaming in the winter sunlight. This was the fruit of Balathor's 44 years of reforms. This was an army created with one purpose: to defeat the Mongols. Talabuga's Mongol forces were depleted, hungry, and demoralized. They'd lost thousands to starvation and combat. They were exhausted after weeks of fruitless campaigning. They'd been relentlessly harassed. Meanwhile, the Hungarian army was fresh, well supplied from nearby fortresses, and most importantly, they were ready to avenge what the Mongols had done to their ancestors 44 years earlier. The battle began. The Hungarian knights executed a well-timed, calculated charge. They crashed into the Mongol line like a wave of steel. Swords and lances struck down. War horses plowed through enemy ranks. Battle cries echoed across the valley. The Mongol forces tried to use their traditional tactics: shoot arrows and retreat, luring the enemy. But they were too weak, too tired, and the Hungarian knights wouldn't be lured like their ancestors. They'd learned their lesson. The Mongol line began to waver, then break, then flee. This was a catastrophic defeat for Talabuga. His army was nearly annihilated. Recognizing the situation was hopeless, Talabuga ordered a full retreat from Hungary, but his suffering wasn't over. On the return journey, Talabuga's remnants were ambushed by the Sekalis, a nomadic people living in the region. Using swift light cavalry tactics, they attacked mercilessly. This was the final blow. Talabuga's army was virtually wiped out. Chronicles recorded that Talabuga returned to Mongol territory with only his wife and a single horse. Obviously an exaggeration, but it emphasized the level of destruction his army suffered. What about Nogai Khan? Did he fare better? Not much. Nogai remained in Transylvania until spring 1286. He succeeded in pillaging some towns: Regan, Brasov, Bistrica. He inflicted damage on civilians in some regions. But like Talabuga, he couldn't capture any fortified castles or cities. Then news of Talabuga's defeat arrived. Shortly after, local Hungarian and Romanian forces, commanded by Roland Borsa, defeated Nogai's troops in another battle. When King Ladislaus IV advanced with his main army to Transylvania to deal with Nogai, the campaign was effectively over. Roland Borsa and local commanders had already largely destroyed Nogai's army. Ladislaus only had to harass the remnants as they limped away in retreat. The second Mongol invasion of Hungary in 1285 ended after just 2 months, and the results were the complete opposite of 1241. The second Mongol invasion of Hungary in 1285 stands as one of the starkest contrasts in military history. 1241. The Mongols crushed Hungary, killing a quarter of the population and destroying most of the kingdom. 1285. Hungary crushed the Mongols, virtually annihilating both invasion armies, capturing and killing thousands of Mongol soldiers. What made the difference? Fortresses. The network of 100 stone castles completely transformed the nature of warfare. They impeded the Mongol advance, denied them supplies, and created safe bases for Hungarian counterattacks. Starvation killed as many Mongol soldiers as combat did. Heavy knights. Hungary's new army, with thousands of knights equipped in Western European armor, proved capable of defeating the Mongols in direct combat. Their charges devastated Mongol forces. Their armor protected them from Mongol arrows. Smart tactics. Hungary didn't try to fight on open plains like in 1241. Instead, they used fortresses, attacked from fortified positions, and retreated to safety when needed. They'd learned their lesson. Preparation. 44 years of systematic preparation made the difference. This wasn't luck. This was the result of will, planning, and the determination of an entire nation. And the consequences? After 1285, the Mongols never attacked Hungary or Central Europe again. This devastating defeat proved the region was too costly to conquer. The Mongol Empire turned its attention elsewhere. Even more than that, in subsequent years, Hungary became the aggressor. Hungarian armies invaded Golden Horde territory and ultimately seized Moldavia from the Mongols. The conquered had become the conqueror. The story of Hungary and the Mongols is one of history's greatest comebacks. It teaches us timeless lessons. Defeat isn't the end. It can be the beginning of great victory if you learn from it. Systematic. Reform and thorough preparation can completely reverse the balance of power. No enemy is invincible. You just need to find their weakness and exploit it. King Belit the Forge didn't live to see the victory of 1285, but he was its true architect. Through his vision and determination, Hungary transformed disaster into opportunity, defeat into victory, and fear into strength. In 1241, Hungary learned the bitterest lesson. In 1285, they taught the Mongols a lesson they would never forget.